This isn't a story. This was reality in the land of the pharaohs, where acts we would consider intimate weren't just private, they were state-sanctioned cosmic engines, and their shadow truths were buried not by sand, but by modern shame. Forget the gold and the grand monuments. We're about to journey into the censored chapters of this civilization, where faith demanded the unthinkable, and where a discovery in 1925 would shatter a century of careful lies. The most intimate rituals of ancient Egypt were a dark mirror to its gleaming achievements. Between the dawn of its kingdoms and the Roman conquest, Egyptian society developed a worldview where every facet of human connection was entangled with divine power. The pharaoh was more than a ruler. His personal life was believed to directly control the Nile's floods and the land's bounty. This created an unbearable pressure to perform, leading to sanctioned extremes that would make our modern world recoil. Victorian archaeologists, upon uncovering this evidence, were so horrified they locked it away, a cover-up that lasted generations. Their piety became a weapon against history itself. The proof comes from places tourists never see: hidden temple inscriptions, medical papyri considered too explicit for display, and artifacts deliberately stored in museum basements. This culture operated on a radical principle. Human sexuality was a direct conduit to the gods, a cosmic energy to be harnessed. Therefore, every act could be a form of prayer, and every ritual duty blurred the line between worship and personal violation. This belief system cast a long, dark shadow, especially on the most vulnerable. Children of the elite and those born into servitude found their bodies treated as sacred property, not their own. When the Nile failed or disaster struck, these sanctioned practices spiraled into deeper desperation and brutality. The turning point came not from a tomb's grand opening, but in a silent laboratory. In 1925, as experts examined Tutankhamun's mummy in detail, they found something chilling. The young king's genitalia were absent, not due to decay, but removed with surgical precision post-mortem. This was no accident. As more royal remains were studied, a horrifying pattern emerged. Several showed signs of genital modification or complete removal. One prince from the 18th dynasty bore evidence suggesting the procedure occurred while he still lived. Ancient texts began to offer disturbing context, speaking of perfecting the deceased for eternal service. This raises a harrowing question. If such modifications were common for the dead, what practices were normalized for the living? But this systemic modification was merely the gateway to a deeper horror. The Egyptian hierarchy of cosmic control permeated all levels of society. At the pinnacle, the pharaoh's performance was a matter of national security. Below, nobles and priests engaged in extreme displays of devotion. And at the very bottom, domestic slaves, especially children, faced systematic exploitation that was not merely accepted, but considered a religious necessity. Royal offspring faced a particularly grim fate. Texts describe children, some barely past infancy, being dedicated to temple service. There, they were subjected to rigorous training in specific physical arts from a brutally young age. They were taught to dissociate, to see their own forms as instruments for divine communion. Medical scrolls note the physical toll: stunted growth from controlled diets, chronic injuries, and early deaths from internal trauma. This abuse extended into wealthy households, where child slaves were commodities valued for their youth and perceived purity. Legal documents record their sale for such purposes. Those who survived bore psychological scars recognizable today as severe trauma, often leading to broken lives and early graves. The priests, however, framed this not as cruelty, but as the highest blessing, a chance for a child to become one with the gods. The economic engine behind this suffering was vast, with a staggering mortality rate among these temple children funding a millennial-old industry of sanctioned abuse. In their quest for the divine, they sacrificed the human. But if that darkness is hard to grasp, brace yourself. It pales before the chaos of Egypt's most infamous festival, an event so extreme that early scholars burned the documents describing it. This next revelation will challenge every notion of religious celebration. Before we descend into that week-long nightmare, hit that like button if you're ready to confront history's shadows. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's fascinating to see a global audience united in uncovering lost truths. The Feast of Drunkenness, dedicated to the goddess Hathor, was the ultimate expression of this sanctioned chaos. Rooted in a myth where the gods tricked a bloodthirsty deity with beer, it evolved into an annual societal reset where all norms collapsed. Preparation involved brewing massive quantities of beer, often laced with psychoactive plants. The resulting brew didn't just intoxicate, it induced visions and obliterated inhibition. For 7 days and nights, civilization unraveled. Public squares became stages for acts of intimacy between masters and slaves. Married individuals abandoned their families. Children were exposed to and pulled into the frenzy. Violence intertwined with the revelry. Participants, believing themselves possessed by gods, engaged in biting, scratching, and violent acts that were seen as holy marks. Some died from their injuries, others were trampled. Priests declared any act during this time to be sacred by default. Abuse was communion. Violence was an offering. Foreign diplomats rode home in disgust, with some kingdoms refusing to send envoys during this period. The aftermath was a wreckage of trauma. Many had no memory of their actions, facing psychological ruin upon learning what they'd done. Families shattered. Economies stalled as cities shut down. Yet the pharaohs deemed this controlled explosion of chaos necessary to maintain cosmic and social order for the rest of the year. Archaeology confirms this darkness. Excavated temple sites reveal chambers with features designed for group activities that match the violent ancient accounts. The decline began when Greek rulers, the Ptolemies, took control. They were caught between maintaining legitimacy with Egyptian priests and their own Hellenistic sensibilities, which were revolted by these rites. Cleopatra I tried to reform the festival, triggering a religious crisis. Her successors, like Cleopatra III, attempted a doomed compromise, holding private, traditional ceremonies while presenting a modest face to their Roman allies. This hypocrisy only deepened the suffering. Child trafficking for secret rites increased, creating a hidden underworld of abuse shielded from Roman eyes. Egyptian society, built on this framework for millennia, was culturally traumatized as its core beliefs were condemned. The final blow came with Augustus Caesar in 30 BCE. Roman forces, scandalized by what they found, systematically destroyed explicit art, burned texts, and executed defiant priests. They didn't just stop the practices, they tried to erase them from history. The children conditioned for this system were left lost, with Roman records noting many could not adapt, meeting tragic ends. Yet the Romans couldn't destroy everything. The evidence they missed would, centuries later, trigger the Great Victorian cover-up. This concealment didn't start in antiquity, but in the 19th century, when Western explorers faced a moral crisis over what they unearthed. Giovanni Belzoni, finding explicit paintings in 1817, plastered them over. Auguste Mariette hoarded artifacts in private collections. Museums like the British Museum and the Louvre created restricted, miscellaneous categories for thousands of objects. Translators edited texts, and archaeologists like Flinders Petrie admitted to burning obscene papyri. Academic study was suppressed for over a century. This legacy of Victorian shame still shapes our view today. Our documentaries and museums present a sanitized, incomplete version of a civilization whose understanding of cosmic power was intimately, and often horrifically, tied to the human form. The full story reveals how easily devotion can warp into systemic abuse when spirituality is weaponized. If this journey into history's concealed corridors has gripped you, I prepared another revelation about a buried truth from the past. The video on screen now will take you there. And if you value peeling back these layers with winds of thought, please hit that subscribe button. Together, we can ensure these silent stories are finally heard.